GM Fox fam, you can probably go ahead and get started. I see a lot of stakeholders here present. I'm sure we might have some more people showing up. We were in a roadmap meeting earlier this week, and we had representatives from engineering and product and operations, and then some other DAO contributors kind of hanging out as well. And we were talking about all of the different projects that we're working on. And when Pendo came up, there was a presentation of a change in strategy from where we had decided to use Pendo previously on the proposal, and kind of the larger contentious call that we had. So we felt that it would be best in the fairness of the DAO to be transparent and to move that conversation to a more public call so we could talk about it openly and discuss. And so this is going to be the stage and venue for that. I know that this has been one of the most contentious things we've talked about in the DAO thus far, but although that is true, we've still had a really nice and respectful conversation around it, and I hope we can continue to do the same. I'm not sure how we would like to start this. I know Diggy, you're up on stage too. I would also invite anyone else who feels strongly about participating in this to please raise your hand and we can get you up here on stage. We can also use the stage chat as well for discussions if text is more comfortable for you while we talk about this. GM Diggy?
GM, I was just messaging DeFi to see none of the maybe a couple, but we need more, I think, engineering presence here before we kick this off. So if we don't mind waiting a couple more minutes.
Sure. Let's maybe bring Lo-Fi back up and we'll resume once we can get some engineering presence.
Thank you.
Just something to note while you bring up Lo-Fi. When this did first come up in that roadmap conversation, we did have all the stakeholders there, and I know we wanted to move this to a more open forum, but it just maybe goes to show that maybe when these types of things come up, it's not a bad thing to have the conversation in the moment, and we can always have a follow-up with the community. But right now, yeah, it was a much better audience before, but we'll see if anyone else trickles in.
I think we just are struggling with the double scheduling here from single-sided staking in this. I wish we get some more here in a minute.
While we wait, I see Imperklin's got a question, so I think we can maybe start by answering it, and then if we want to revisit it, we can. But yeah, to answer your question, Michael's asking to start by explaining what's changed and why we're addressing this again today. Nothing has necessarily changed from what's been approved in the proposal. What might be perceived as a change is that we hadn't ever officially ratified what the default version of the app that we'd point to would be. So we still are planning to offer this opt-in app that has tracking, where users, if they prefer not to be tracked, have the option to use this private version. So we still want to have a private version and not necessarily force users to have to opt out of being tracked, still make it a clear opt-in. Really, the question is, which app do we default pointing users to from places like ShapeShift.com? And there's been just an increasing understanding that this data is very necessary for us as a product-focused DAO. In order to succeed, there's no guarantee that we're going to succeed. And right now, in many ways, we're very much flying blindly. And our competitors aren't. They all track data and stuff, and they use this to improve their products. And we want to be able to track this data, report it to the community so we can have a good idea of how we're doing and if we're doing better over time, enable work streams to have data that they can use to prove their worthiness to the community and show that they have data to back up the fact that they're adding value. And yeah, we want to basically propose product. What we'd like to propose, making the version that has Pendo just the default version that we point users to, still making it a clear opt-in on that version. That if they continue using it, they will be opting into sharing anonymized usage metrics. Or if they prefer not to, they can use this private version. And part of the rationale there is just that we think that most users are going to just use the default version. Most users right now are happy sharing data with a lot of the other apps that they use, and most users don't see it as a big issue, especially because, again, this data is anonymized, and it's valuable for them to share data with the product they use so that it can improve. But if they do care, then we want to give them a private version, which is still going above and beyond what all of our competitors are offering. So hopefully that's some good context on what has changed. Nothing has necessarily changed. We're just trying to get clarity on which version is the default version that we point users to. And product wants to make a case for pointing users to the version that includes Pendo.
To piggyback off that a little bit, I do think some things have even changed. I think we might even be understating it a little bit. I think in the past few months since we first discussed this, we've entered more into a bear market. Our entire treasury is worth significantly less, which just stresses the importance of making the right decisions at the right time. And we have less time to kind of make guesses and hope that this produces revenue or hope that this gains us users. There's also been a shift in a lot of community members, at least that I've talked to. So I think it's worth bringing up again just because maybe what we agreed upon as a community a few months ago is no longer what we as a community agree upon now. So I think this hopefully sets some good precedents in the future too, that just because as a community or as a DAO we vote on one thing or accept one thing doesn't mean that's locked in forever. You know, we are a growing, changing community that is hopefully constantly educating ourselves and making better decisions and learning from past mistakes and hopefully anticipating the future better. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to revisit.
Hey, Willie, I have a follow-up question to what you just explained. Thank you very much for explaining what has changed. You mentioned it would be an opt-in strategy, and that's consistent with what was discussed last time when this topic was brought up. That all makes sense. But then you also said something about the default build will have Pendo, but users can opt to use a non-tracking version. That sounds more like opt-out. Can you clarify whether this is going to be off by default and users can opt in, or it will be on by default and users can opt out? Thank you.
Yes, happy to clarify that. Beard actually posted a Figma design for kind of how we envision this working. But the idea would be very similar to kind of like MetaMask when you're setting it up, how they basically, like at the point that you connect a wallet, it would be clear that, hey, if you connect your wallet and use this version, you will be agreeing to share anonymized usage metrics with ShapeShift. Or there's a secondary option, no thanks, take me to the private version. So basically, like, users will be clicking continue to connect their wallet and to opt into tracking, or they have a very easy option right there to go to the private version. Does that clarify? And I encourage you guys to click that link that Beard shared in the chat for clarity.
It does. That answers my question. Thank you.
Awesome.
Cool. So I just, wanted to, I guess, piggyback off of that just to reiterate. So I think when this proposal initially passed, there was some confusion where some people assumed that we would be defaulting to the private version. Our goal is to make the first place users land essentially app.shapeshift.com like it is right now, and present them with that design that Beard just showed us. And if they continue on app.shapeshift.com, they're opting into the anonymized analytics. And if they want to opt out, they would be redirected to the private version. And our goal, of course, is to hopefully get the majority of users on app.shapeshift.com so that we can get the data and insights that we need in the DAO.
I've just joined, but do you guys mind if I kind of give my perspective on this situation, given that I have changed my mind from the initial conversation that happened at the beginning of the year?
Please.
So, firstly, I want to say I still wholly believe in the ideology that we shouldn't unnecessarily track users, and that we're not a data company first, and we're never going to track and sell that data, and that users' privacy is important. The more existential question or risk that I think that we're currently facing, and I haven't seen discussed enough, is that I don't believe that we have product market fit at the moment. I believe there was a point in time where we had it and we lost it, and this can happen, and that we need to regain it. And by that I mean when we were a market exchange and a decentralized counterparty to trades, and we generated revenue from spreads on trades, we had a lucrative business model. And unfortunately, given the regulatory environment we operate in, we had to implement KYC. It killed 99%, call it a rounding error, all the users. And the efforts that we've made since then, haven't got that back. Now, product market fit, fundamentally, I think we need to look at ShapeShiftDAO through the lens of a startup rather than a continuation of what we previously were. And I think that our number one focus needs to be on regaining that product market fit. The marketing and product decisions are fundamentally quantitative these days, and I'm concerned that while the ideology is important, I don't think that offering a dark version, dark for the lack of a better term, privacy preserving version, where the user has a clear understanding that is available, and it's a choice to do that, to opt into metrics. I think while we provide that option, where we're not abandoning that ideology. And I'd never advocate for abandoning a privacy preserving option. However, like the power of defaults is in, dark patterns, it's called in SEO stuff, and just in UI design, the power of defaults is extremely strong, like Pareto principle strong. If you give people two options versus you give them a default, they're going to go with the default. Now, I don't want us to put ourselves in a position where we hold our ideology so strongly that we don't have the necessary information required to be able to make the product decisions that we need to get the DAO cash flow positive and build things that users want. We can build things all day and burn through the treasury, but if we build the wrong thing, ultimately we're going to fail. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say here is I don't feel great about tracking users if we were, using that data for nefarious purposes or as part of our business model. I wouldn't be okay with what we're building. For the purposes of using that data to make the correct product decisions and correct informed decisions and having sufficient amounts of data, while still offering and never wavering on that option to provide a privacy-preserving version, I don't think that we're abandoning the ideology. They're not mutually exclusive, and that we really should view the lack of users and metrics as an existential risk to the DAO. Building something that no one wants or no one uses is the number one way that startups die. And I think that we need to think of ourselves, honestly and through that lens. So I have changed my mind on this. I don't think that offering another option, offering an opt-out, is abandoning the ideology. And the fact that other things like Foxchain that we're building are expensive and difficult is demonstrative that we're not abandoning that and that we are going down that path. I just think that, we have to be really clear about the impacts of the decisions that we make. And I don't want us to put ideology in front of survival.
Agreed. I think we have a responsibility, all of us here, to the DAO and to the Fox token holders. And we need to make sure that we prove and measure the effectiveness of what we're doing and if we're successful. For example, how can any of us go and ask for budgets and salaries for our work streams without proving our value and measuring the effectiveness of what we're doing?
I hear. Go ahead, Pete. Yeah, I do hear what you're saying. I personally disagree, and maybe this is a broader conversation. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but to me, opt-in, opt-out very much is separate from the default decision, and we can still default and primarily point users to the version that does have tracking, the version that is in the best interest of the DAO to have users use, because we get more valuable data that we really need, frankly, in order to maximize the likelihood that we're going to be successful and that we're going to be here for the long term, and that there's still going to be a private version period of ShapeShift that we can offer, right? Because if we can't sustain development and fund development and achieve product market fit, then there's not even going to be a private version, right? So it's still, the users are still opting in. We're not just pointing to a version where they're automatically being tracked as soon as they land there and they have to go explicitly find some action to take to opt out of it. We're taking the version that when they connect their wallet, they will explicitly see that if they connect their wallet there, they will be opting in to being tracked. That is the opt-in part. And if they don't want to be tracked, they don't have to opt out. They just click the version to go to the private version, and they never get tracked. So I hear what you're saying, but I think it's a very important distinction, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're giving them the choice.
And that choice is why it's opt-in, because they have the choice.
I think that the notion of opting in is something that most like web users are aware of. You know, it's there's Netflix documentaries about this stuff. The attention economy is no secret these days. People understand that privacy policies, you know, they're available, they're clear, should you choose to read them. But I think that anyone, you know, that uses the web these days is either at this point ignorant, in which case that subset of users don't care about their privacy and never will. Or if they are aware of it, they should assume that if there is a privacy policy in terms of service, that there is going to be something in there. It's you know, and our privacy policy in terms of service are very readable. Like they were written by a lawyer, but they're not legalese. It's a very casual tone. It's very explicit what's going on. I think that by, you know, using that stuff, people should assume that they're tracked. And, you know, it's one click away to see the details of what that tracking is for and why and what will be done with the data. I just, you know, encourage people to think more about the risk that this presents to us if we cannot make the correct informed decisions, with the data that we need. We don't want to put the ideology and then the implementation details around these decisions in front of our survival. And that's what I'm primarily concerned about.
Mr. Nerdhair, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you. So my primary concern in this whole discussion is for our users, but the thing that really worries me the most is that apparently we had a significant subset of DAO members, including me, that understood that this was decided by governance previously, and that at least some other significant subset of users, or a subset of DAO members, believed that it wasn't decided by governance and that it could be changed by, you know, workstream leaders for pragmatic purposes. I think that confusion endangers the integrity of the governance process and is probably more of an existential risk to the DAO than anything else that we've discussed so far. And that doesn't speak to the particular issue, but it is, I think, a sort of a separate thing. I wanted to make sure we were considering it. As to the specific tracking, you know, implementation, I would be in favor of showing, you know, a screen to the users and asking them nicely, you know, even on the main version, basically saying, you know, before we get started, please, you know, choose to contribute to our project. I don't think the language on the Figma thing is quite 100%. I would definitely stamp it and say yes. But my main consideration there is that the big blue button is like continue, and the small gray, you know, pattern is the private version. I think that, you know, we should present these as not as if the user is getting a degraded experience. You know, we want the user to have and make a choice, and that you know, we need to make that clear in our UI design. Whether or not the tracking is opt in or opt out on a technical level, we can show a screen like this before we start the Pendo agent. So from a technical perspective, it is possible to achieve an opt-in using a mechanism like this. But an assumption, I think that it's very dangerous to assume that users are expect to be tracked, that they, you know, have some level of savvy. I think that our primary, I think that the DAO will succeed by making the product that I can share with my parents. That my dad would use. I think that the major barrier to the adoption of crypto in general is the difficulty of getting on board, the difficulty of using it, and the people who can't even necessarily tell that they're using a different browser, than they were the other day. And we need to not make assumptions about our users' willingness to be tracked. We need to get affirmative consent from them, informed consent. As long as the user is giving informed consent, I'm fine with an implementation that goes forward from there. But we can't skimp on the informing, and we can't skimp on the consent.
I think that the notion of informed consent is a well-cemented pattern across the board. And I also want to point out that bar some very obscure things like Tornado Cash, we offering a privacy-preserving option is leaps and bounds ahead of what the industry does. DYDX blocks IPs, Uniswap blocks assets, MetaMask tracks addresses and IPs. The fact that we're offering an option that's a click away, and I can't make this clear enough. It's it's either a one word in the URL, for example, dark.shapeshift.com versus app, or a single click. Essentially zero friction to be able to access a privacy preserving option is extraordinarily better than what the rest of the industry is doing with its VC backers. And none of this changes the product experience. In fact, it'll enhance it. The guides help crypto illiterate users to get onboarded. We can't offer that option without. The data that it provides us enables us to make decisions to be able to offer better things to users. Again, I'd like to remind people that the ideology and tracking are not mutually exclusive. We can provide both, and it benefits us to do so, and it's not at the detriment of users. We're not selling that data. We're using that data to give the users ultimately better features and options. It doesn't detract from the product. It, by definition, adds to it. And anyone that's not concerned about product market fit at the stage that we're at is perhaps in the wrong place.
Fundamentally, I'm less concerned about our about the DAO's utility of the DAO's product to the DAO than I am about the utility of it to the users. I think that the users have in many cases no voice, either because they're not here in the Discord and not taking advantage of that, or because they're they aren't technically savvy, and we have to treat our users' privacy and security and everything else like it is a sacred trust. I would be happy tracking users if they have informed consent, if they've given informed consent to do so. I think that changing the default experience from app to alpha would probably require or should require a governance vote. But if we can achieve that, then I wouldn't be against it.
Hey, Mr. Nerdhair, I've got a question. So I don't know if you've seen the example mockup that's been shared in the ShapeShiftDAO stage chat. It's a 4-picture only. The copy there is example text, but it's a Figma link, and I've taken a look at it. And it seems to me that it makes it very clear that someone is choosing to opt into that tracking from that button. My question for you is, so first of all, I definitely agree with everything you're saying about informed consent and no skimping on the information, no skimping on the consent. You and I are in 100% alignment on that ethos here. My question to you is, do you feel that the Figma image that has been circulated is consistent with your desires for informed consent, or do you feel that it's inconsistent? And if so, where is it inconsistent?
That's a good question, and thank you for asking. I think that as far as the design goes, the design is okay, except for that button concern. I think that the copy needs to reflect a few additional things. For one thing, unlike most sites that collect data for internal analytics purposes, the data that we collect is essentially part of a public science project on the effectiveness of this particular website. And a user can visit CNN.com and have a reasonable expectation that their internal analytics stuff won't be viewable by anyone in the world. The user of our site, we don't keep our information siloed like that, and the user needs to understand that what they're contributing is visible to the public. I think that the copy should also reflect a bit more nuance on the stuff that we are collecting or that we hope to be able to collect. For example, right now, it does not cover, in my opinion, it wouldn't give effective consent for us tracking which type of wallet users use. That's not an anonymized click or page view event, and a user might well perceive that to be under the list of keys, addresses, transaction balances, etc. So I think we need to be a little broader in the language for what we're communicating we will collect, and we should probably be more, in order to counterbalance that, we should probably be more specific as well about how we intend not to overcollect. Not collecting IP addresses is one thing, though of course we need to effectively communicate that we're not Pendo and we can't control them. But they won't give us the IP address, but we can't control what they do with it.
They do say that we can prevent them from even logging the IP address, but to your point, we can't guarantee that. Yeah.
We should also so as far as the design of this tracking system goes, the most useful or the most encouraging thing to me about how we've designed this entire system is that instead of some magical algorithm having control over the the identifier that is used to track users, we control that, and we can make sure that identifier is rotated on a regular basis. We can make sure that that we're not collecting data and then de-anonymizing it, or that we're not collecting data and then anonymizing it, that the process, that anonymization process is happening on your browser. One of the most significant, easiest, and from a technical perspective, I suppose, a way to show that would just be let the users see what they're submitting. I've mentioned that in the past. I don't think that's a necessary thing for this, but I can imagine, especially for a privacy-focused user, that it might be very encouraging to be able to literally click a link on that and say, show me what you're going to send, not just describe, like, here's a log, and you can see what you're sending at any time. That would give me a lot of confidence. Now, I'm a weird person, and I'm kind of a walking edge case, so that might not be best for everyone. But
I imagine you'll be using the private version, Mr. Nerdhair.
At least for
Yeah,
something. I'll also definitely be using the public version because see, now I'm doing it. I'm conflating analytics with the normal version, and which I want to avoid. But I'll definitely be using that if for no other reason to make sure it doesn't break.
I hear everything you're saying, and I really appreciate you being open-minded to taking this approach, but also still continuing to look out for our users. And this is like the kind of conversation that I love that we're having, because it's collaborative. We can come to a great compromise that's better than kind of any of the initial ideas on either side, and that's what we need. That's what we should be striving to do as a DAO, because I know product and engineering, they want to their whole goal here is to build the best product for users and make that sustainable. And we do agree. We want to give users this private option. And I know security workstream and those who are on the other side, they still have the best interests of the DAO. They just have slightly different opinions on how to do that. And they're more on the side of like, we need to empower users and go above and beyond to protect users. And I love that, right? And I think that if we can keep in mind that both sides ultimately want what's best and be open-minded to hear each other out and come to a compromise. Like, I love the idea of making it extra explicitly clear to the users what type of data we actually are tracking. And that's cool because we actually aren't tracking a lot of personal data that users would care about, right? Even if they are using the version, I don't see that as decreasing users' security or privacy, because we're tracking these anonymized page views and clicks. And ultimately, that is, in my opinion, it's not just the best interest for the DAO, it is in the best interest for the users for us to be able to collect that anonymized data. But we should do it in a way that it's transparent to the users what data they'll be sharing, and they are explicitly opting in. And I think we're pretty close to that with this initial mock-up that we have, but appreciate the feedback for how we can just make that extra clear. And we want that feedback because ultimately that's going to be the result in the best product. So
I do want to just express that I'm not. I understand we need data, and I understand we need it like yesterday. But deciding whether or not it's going to be opt in or opt out isn't going to make it happen any faster. We are very close to Pendo now. We've been very close for a while, but priorities have gotten shuffled. IPFS got pulled first, for example. Whether or not we decide to make it the default experience, isn't going to change the timeline on starting to get data. So if the concern is that we don't have data and we need more data, we will get more data. But
that decision around the default does change the kind of bifurcation at that point, though. Once we enable this, like, the power of defaults is extremely strong. And
it means we'll get more data after the same initial lead time.
Correct. Yeah, we're in agreement about that. And just to address another one of your points, this data that we're collecting is ultimately with the intent to benefit the user. It benefits us first because we're able to make better decisions, but those better decisions get better product outcomes for the user. So, like, this is for the user. And again, to reiterate my point, I'd be deeply concerned. I'd like everyone to think about their contributions to this DAO in any capacity in the following way: are we building something useful for users? And at the moment, I don't think we know the answer to that, and I don't think we know how many users we have. And everyone should kind of exercise some introspection and ask themselves, do you want to be putting your efforts during your waking hours towards something that's not useful for people? Because I can assure you it's a much more rewarding and fruitful exercise to build something that people love and want to use. And if you're not concerned with that, you should really ask yourself why. We really want to be building something that people love. And having this data available to us helps us do that. And privacy as an option doesn't make it yet less useful what we're building. In fact, we're offering a better option to the market than most others in the space are.
Dang it. Right. So as from my admittedly limited perspective, I don't think that the need of data to inform our future roadmap will be critical until we get to Axiom feature parity, because until then we kind of have our work cut out for us. Like the single biggest best thing we could do for users, in my opinion, is to kill Axiom with a flamethrower. And until we can do that, adding a particular protocol or in integration with some new DeFi opportunity or whatever is, as in my mind, not nearly as important. I think that we'll definitely achieve data before we achieve that. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
The earlier we are, the more important the data is. And I think like Willie's got a pretty unique perspective as someone who's built and sold 2 companies before, and Diggy as well from the product side of things. Product and marketing largely these days is a quantitative exercise rather than a qualitative one. And designing like surveys and stuff that would be the alternative is a very difficult exercise. Like asking the right questions is incredibly difficult. Having good data that we can rely on helps us make decisions early. And we should question everything that we're bringing over from Axiom because we didn't have product market fit there either post KYC. So, I mean, Willie can add words to that effect of like how instrumental that data is to make decisions early on and to be able to pivot and to be able to try things quickly and see if they work and double down on them. We've built some things recently, like Foxy is nearly 7 million of TVL there, which is not insignificant. And, we have that data, anonymized data through TVL, but it would be great to have a breakdown of like, what wallets that they're using, where are those people coming from to help inform those decisions better so that we can further focus our efforts on what's working, as opposed to other things that limited data we do have suggests they're not.
The copy that is on the Figma thing right now would not cover, in my opinion, tracking what a wallet user is using, but it also wouldn't cover tracking which DeFi opportunities they'd invested in, or even just whether they're a whale or not, because that's all basically balance and address information.
We can get that through clicks though. And I agree with you, Mr. Nerher. We should make it clear if we're going to track which wallet users are connecting, we should absolutely make that clear to the users. I love that suggestion. But even just the data of which users are clicking through these flows we have to deposit into Yearn and how far they're getting through those funnels and stuff is immensely valuable. And I do see both sides. Like I very much hear what you're saying, Mr. Nerher, that until we have parity and stuff, like does it really make sense to look at like whether we had product market fit when we know like, okay, we had some degree of product market fit before, definitely weren't there, but now, we have less features, right? And we've been so focused on rebuilding this open source version that it's going to be more valuable to measure that product market fit once we've kind of gotten to where this milestone that we have aligned on, and that we aligned on even pre-decentralization, and made the decision to rebuild the version and knew that what that would entail would be probably losing some users while we were so focused on rebuilding the existing product in an open source version and not releasing new features and staying up to speed with the industry when we already had some catch up to do. So I'm really not surprised by the fact that we're not seeing an explosive user growth right now. And I think we should be having these product market fit decisions, but I still am confident in the flag that we planted and that we're building towards. DeFi is right though, like the data, there is such a big difference in a startup when you finally have some data, right? Like, and the people that are in the stage chat posting, like it's not, initially you have to make some guesses, right? You have to make some experiments and you have to make your best educated guess with the data you have available on what is the most valuable product for us to build. And but as soon as you actually have quantifiable data coming in, it just changes everything, right? And we have very much been flying pretty blindly with some really great educated assumptions and visions that the community did align behind, and that I can't wait for us to build that still. I still think we're on the right track for it. But now is the time where we need to start measuring that data. And the sooner we can start capturing that data, the sooner we can get benchmarks and start to notice some trends. and at least start to get some ideas on like, okay, the users who are using the product, are they having a good time, right? Or are they bouncing, and where are the points that they're bouncing? Like those little tweaks are so necessary for just conversion rate optimization. Like those pay dividends, and we cannot do that stuff without the necessary data. So
it's always going to be a combination of like qualitative intuition, which a lot of us possess, but that comes from keeping an eye on market trends and understanding just the innate human nature of what people want to use, but augmenting that with quantitative data and like little tweaks. Like, do people land on the dashboard and immediately click the DeFi button? That's like an indication that the DeFi page should be the dashboard, for example, like, which in turn, like Willie was saying, increases conversion rates, and we can measure and track and optimize conversion rates at different steps through the funnel, which ultimately gets us more TVL, more protocol revenues. It's better for the DAO. Like, it's always going to be a combination of both, but at the moment we're flying like largely blind and on assumptions, which at the current stage is kind of the best that we've got. But we shouldn't preclude ourselves from that rich qualitative data.
Taking a sort of a step up, I had a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, I think that it would be essential for any governance proposal to address this issue to explicitly specify what the types of data we are willing to collect from users and what we're not. I don't think that we should make sure that there is not an option for a certain set of, just the day-to-day operations of the DAO to take decisions on we want to track this, so we're going to open up that language a bit. I think that not necessarily the specific copy, but the principles for what it is we are willing to track should be explicitly defined by governance. Secondly, dang it. I don't know. I have a second thing, but I don't know what it is.
Well, you remember that. I think, Mr. Nair, I hear where you're coming from, and I think it's an interesting situation where we're not trying to say let's make a decision that goes explicitly against the language in the proposal, but there clearly was like a difference in kind of, I guess, assumptions or opinions on the exact specification for the proposal, and I think it would probably just be best practices for product to make another proposal with these specifications that you're requesting, so that there isn't any confusion, and just go through the governance process for best practices. And to your point, if we can still in the meantime have that not slow down data collection, and at least share this version with Pendo with the community, and start testing Pendo and making sure that it is ready for when that proposal passes, to make it the default app if the proposal passes, I think that's fine. How does that sound to the rest of product and engineering and ops?
I think that's fine.
That seems to me like it'd be workable. I remembered the second thing. The second thing is around guides, basically. We're planning to get guides via Pendo. Pendo does analytics and it also does guides. The guides are user facing. The guides, I think, don't make a whole lot of sense as like a separate thing that's only available to alpha users, or the tracking version. I think, of course, that's part of one of Pendo's, that's sort of their catch. You can choose any analytics provider, but if your users are reliant on the guides and you can't switch away from them, I think we should make it a priority at some level to take that guide delivery system, which is taking a lot of technical work to make safe in the first place, and turn it into something that's natively integrated into our app. At least the guides that turn out to be useful and we want to, bake in.
I think that's a separate conversation, but I understand where your head's at.
Mention it so that other people had heard that thought. That's all.
I appreciate that, Mr. Nair. I really, really appreciate all of your opinions on this and your suggestions and your open-mindedness. So I think we have kind of a clear path for next steps. We got a kind of specify the current plans that we, at least product and engineering, want to propose, and then take it to the community for final review. And we'll still, of course, be open to suggestions for how we can do even better throughout that process, better copy, better everything. I want to make sure, I think we've shared our positions on this pretty well. I want to see if anyone in the community has any questions or wants to come up on stage and share their perspective. While we wait, Tyler, what are your thoughts on kind of the what's been discussed so far?
I'm glad that we're going the route of another governance proposal to discuss this further, because I do agree with what was presented kind of super early on in the call about us not being on the same page of the understanding of how it was worded was one of my bigger concerns here. So I'm really glad that we were able to come together and have this discussion. At the end of the day, I think there's some extremely valid points on both sides. Yeah, I'm not really one to rock a boat here too. I definitely feel like I'm going to support through ops, however we end up deciding via the governance proposal here.
Which version will you use, public or private?
Personally, for myself, I'll probably use private. Just being honest.
No judgment, yeah.
One thing I want to bring up too is that while this is obviously big for product and engineering and us for what we're doing for the DAO and for the Fox token holders, this is also extremely important for marketing. You know, marketing is big focus is user acquisition, and they need to know like what actions they're taking move the needle for user acquisition. And they need to really understand what it is that converts a customer, right, or a person into a user, along with product. So this isn't just us that is going to be, you know, using this data to inform our product decisions. This data is going to be used to also inform marketing decisions.
Yeah, it's a really good point. This is like a DAO level or cross-functional concern. And again, with all the points I've been trying to make here, it's like we absolutely have the users in mind first. And the reason that I've changed my perspective on this and support the default and would vote yes on the governance proposal is that I ultimately believe it benefits the user first and foremost. And that I do think that us offering a privacy option is unique and is also a benefit, and it's not a downside to offer a tracking version. And that, again, everyone should be thinking about this through the lens of, and every action that we take, first and foremost, are we building something that people want, and what do they want? And all of our actions, should be taken accordingly. So try and think about this less about like this individual aspect of, do we track users by default with their consent, and more about like, are we building what people want and love? And, how do we get closer towards that?
Tyler's thing earlier about using private or public, like my goal in life is going to be to make sure that the analytics version doesn't report any data that I wouldn't be uncomfortable sharing, right? So if I think I'm definitely going to use the analytics version, because if it is reporting anything I don't want it to, we should fix that.
Yeah, I just want to state my support for this. I'm glad that this is going to come up in a new proposal. I will vote to do it the way that we've been talking about and give people an option, and I will also use the analytics version. Thank you, everyone, for this conversation.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
I think that part of the conversation, and the analytics part of it is obviously what we're talking about here for Pendo. And I think if it's a useful tool and can provide information, that's great. I don't have a problem with it. I think another conversation that maybe might be needed in the future is as a DAO or as a product, are we leading by example and being innovators in the crypto market space? or are we just following the lead of what the current customers or the current user base know that is of value and want to see as a product? So are we being led by the consumer, or are we leading the market and making the market bow to our will of providing something that no one can deny is worth of is valued? And I think that a lot of this I keep hearing is that, we need to know what the customer wants so we could build a product that, meets their needs and makes them feel comfortable. And that's great if, we're not going to be leaders in the space and we're going to be the ones that are basically just hearing what the users find as the most important feature for this moment, which in crypto, from all I've seen, changes, every couple of months. So are we going to change our product every couple of months or every 6 months or every year? I mean, yeah, our name is ShapeShift, so maybe that's what we do. But I think that at this point, we should really, kind of decide, do we want to be the innovators that are coming up with the ideas that steer the market for the future, or steer crypto space for the future, or do we want to be the ones that are just basically, listening to what is working at this moment in time and chasing that down and taking the dev time and the money and all that to build that after it's already been out there and told to us that that's what they want?
So why can't we do both? Never was, because
Yeah, exactly.
Those aren't the same thing. They're not.
Every company that you're mentioning that has been an innovator and a leader and has disrupted and changed the world, they did both, right? They made an educated guess on what they thought was the best thing to build, not necessarily just asking users, but saying, hey, here's what we think the world needs, and we're going to build it. And then they measured the data, and the more data we can have along the way to incrementally improve and make sure that we are making the right decisions, and that we're not just making the right decisions, but the best decisions, the optimized decisions. And we can only really make those decisions with the data, and that data is valuable. So I hear what you're saying, but we really need to do both. We need to innovate. We are innovating. We're playing a little bit of catch up, but at the same time too, we need to know how our product is working. And really, the only way to get you can't ask users that. To your point, you need to be able to measure it quantitatively, and it's the combination of the two that has led the great companies of the world to their success, and that's the approach we want to take as well.
Yeah, to kind of put some terminology around what you described, otherwise, is kind of like the build it and they will come mentality, which is often a common mistake that startups make, is that this is what we think is valuable, and we're going to build it, and then people are going to like it. And to Willie's point, and Beard as well, it's like by measuring what's working, we can then innovate on top of what's working. But without a baseline for what is working, we're relying on our intuition, which is a good starting point, but the data doesn't lie. So like we need to take what works, and then we can innovate on top of that. For example, like Foxy, we're kind of going down that path now, and I think we're really onto something there, but it'd be great to have even more data around it.
Yeah, I'm not arguing. Definitely, you want to know what's working, and you want to know what you can iterate on and build upon. I'm not arguing that point, but I just, from hearing some of the conversation points that, we need to know what to build and we need to know where to put our focus at, that to me sounds different than, we're going to create something that brings people in. And to your point, DeFi, I know you said that it's a big mistake that startups usually say, build it and they will come. Well, that's usually the argument of people who did not build something that, was innovative enough to basically change the market for the good or whatever. It's very hard to do. I'm not saying that this is an easy thing to do. It's very hard to do, to come up with something that's innovative and desired and wanted. But that's just a question of is that what we're striving for? And Will, you kind of said we're kind of do both, and that makes a lot of sense. To go down that path to doing both, and I hope that we can continue that, and we don't spread ourselves too thin by trying to do that, because when your resources are dedicated to keeping up with the Joneses as well as trying to come up with something new, usually something falls off and something doesn't happen, and then you reinvent yourself or you have to start over, and that's that happens a lot in business, and that's fine. But I do know that you can be innovative and you can challenge the norms, and you can move the needle, and that I've proven that many times over, and I'm sure many have as well in your creative sides and stuff like that. And I'm just saying, as a point, as a DAO, how do we balance that focus? What determines that? And I guess the analytics to some extent will give us that, where we can say how are we going to balance that a little bit better. So I'm not against it. I just wanted to just say that there is a point to be had that, if we are saying that we're, being a platform that is, decentralized and not looking, to broach the privacy issues and stuff like that, do we go all in on that, or do we scale it back and say, well, we're for that, but we still need to, have certain information to be able to go on? And if that's our decision, that's fine.
I want to point out that, I mean, you said some stuff, but like innovation doesn't mean new necessarily. A perfect example of this is like Apple created the iPhone. There were tons of like phones before it, but they did it right. They did it like exactly how they thought the users would like it, and it became this huge thing. So just because we're not creating new things doesn't mean that we're not innovating on a product. And that's kind of like the whole point of data-driven user analytics stuff.
I would say that Apple did create something new with the screen, the touch screen, and the different form factor and stuff like that than what was currently out with the clamshell type models and the way people were interacting with their phones back then, and especially with the app interactions and stuff like that. I know there was other attempts at doing that, but I would say that it was a new product. And yes, they did have a lot of analytics, and yes, they did come with a lot of research into what they wanted to bring to market. But I think that was done.
Never was. Real quick, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're totally right. Apple absolutely was a huge pioneer and super innovative. But if Apple hadn't been collecting data and an Android came and launched a competitive copycat product and did collect data, Android would be the king right now. And I have zero doubt about that. So I hear your point, but I want to make it clear that like data does not in any way stifle innovation. And
Absolutely.
We're going to continue innovating, but we're going to. Yeah, Diggy actually posted that, and I wanted to broadcast it because I think she's absolutely right. Right, like we can innovate, and we can use data to better inform our decisions and get better at innovating over time. But without that data, we're just flying blindly, and we're making our best guesses, which maybe we'll get lucky and we'll guess the right thing, but we'll have no idea if we're on the right track. And if we continue down that path, then it's setting ourselves up for failure and setting up competitors who come copy us and do decide to collect more data, still in a way that honors users. They're going to beat us because that data is such a crucial advantage. And if anyone, I really ask people who haven't ever been in that position to track data month over month and to see, are we doing better? Are we growing? And use that to inform decisions. If you haven't had that experience, then I don't think you really have the full context of how valuable this data is. And I hope that you'll defer a bit to the product team and the engineering team who do have this experience to know that we need this data. Otherwise, it's going to be an uphill battle, and we don't have to set ourselves up for an uphill battle. We can get the best of both worlds. And I'm glad. I think this conversation has been a great conversation, and I'm hopeful that through this proposal process, we can align on a proposal that everyone feels happy about and is going to be the best outcome, both for the DAO and for our users.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, and I just want to say one last thing that
let's set. We're already over, and we've got a community AMA that's scheduled. So let's conclude this now, and if this needs to become a conversation that we want to continue on in the AMA, we will do it there. But for the time being, I know that there are other people that need to jump to other meetings or go to lunches or things like that. And I think we kind of basically are at an agreement with what the next steps are here. So I appreciate everyone's time.